Marcus checks his banking app on his lunch break, sitting in his car in the parking lot with a sandwich half unwrapped on his lap, and the number reads $10,412. He's had money in this account before. He's had more some months, less other months, and none of it ever felt like anything except a number that moved around. This time something different happens, something he can't quite explain to himself yet. He sits there for a moment longer than usual, sandwich forgotten, just looking at the 5 digits on the screen. We'll come back to exactly what changes in him, because it's not the money. It's something that happens in his head about 90 seconds after he closes the app, and it's the real subject of this whole video. Most people assume the difference between having some savings and having real savings is just a bigger number. It isn't. Somewhere around this specific threshold, the brain starts treating the same dollars completely differently, and almost nobody explains why. Here's the part researchers have actually studied, and it's stranger than it sounds. Money below a certain threshold gets mentally filed as leftover, spare change with a lot of zeros, the kind of amount your brain assumes will get absorbed into ordinary life eventually. But once an account crosses a specific psychological line, different for everyone, but often somewhere close to $10,000, the brain reclassifies it. It stops being leftover and starts being an asset, something with a kind of ownership attached to it that spare change never had. This isn't just a feeling Marcus invented for himself. Economists have a name for it: mental accounting, the tendency of the brain to sort money into separate categories that don't behave like actual math. $100 found in an old coat pocket gets spent differently than $100 from a paycheck, even though both are worth exactly $100. Somewhere around a 5-figure balance, a similar kind of resorting happens, except this time the money gets promoted instead of discounted, moved from the mental folder marked extra into the folder marked mine, actually mine in a way that matters. Marcus didn't decide to feel differently about the $10,412. The feeling just showed up, uninvited, somewhere in the drive back to work, a small tightening in his chest at the thought of the number going down instead of up. Here's why that tightening matters more than any budgeting advice he's ever read. Behavioral economists call this loss aversion. The fact that losing an amount of money hurts roughly twice as much as gaining the same amount feels good. Below the threshold, there wasn't enough there yet for loss aversion to fully switch on, the amount too small and too temporary feeling to register as something that could actually be lost. Above it, every potential withdrawal now competes against an actual felt sense of loss, not just a number on a screen. The same way losing a wallet with $11 in it stings far less than losing one with 400, even though both are simply gone. That shift in feeling is doing more to protect Marcus's money than any rule he could write for himself, any app that rounds up purchases, any spreadsheet with color-coded categories. It's not a system. It's a feeling that showed up on its own, uninvited, the moment the number got large enough to actually matter to the part of his brain that decides what's worth defending. A month earlier, before the account crossed the line, Marcus had pulled $600 out for a last-minute weekend trip without thinking twice. The trip was fine, a few days at a friend's cabin, nothing extravagant. He barely remembers being tempted, because at the time it was just a number moving from one place to another, no different from paying a bill. If the same opportunity came up today at $10,412, he notices something new happening before he even opens the app. A kind of resistance, small but real. That wasn't there a month ago. A pause where there used to be none at all. This is where it gets tested, about 6 weeks after the number first crossed the line. His sister mentions a concert, good seats, expensive ones, close enough to the stage that he'd texted a photo of the seating chart with 3 exclamation points. For a second, the old Marcus flickers back, the one who would have pulled the money without a second thought, who would have said yes before his sister finished the sentence. He opens the account instead, looks at the balance, and feels that same tightening from the parking lot. He goes to the cheaper seats instead, tells his sister the good ones sold out, which isn't quite true, and doesn't think about it again until he's driving home from the concert, oddly content in a seat 12 rows further back than he would have picked a month ago, the music sounding exactly the same from there as it would have from the front. Here's the mechanism behind why a specific dollar figure, not a general resolution to save more, is what finally changed his behavior. Vague goals like save more give the brain nothing concrete to defend. A specific number crossed and held gives the brain something that starts to feel like it belongs to a version of himself worth protecting. The number isn't magic, it's just the first amount large enough to make the idea of an emergency fund or a future feel like it's actually happening to him specifically, instead of being advice meant for someone else. Marcus had tried the vague version of this for years, telling himself every January that this would be the year he got serious about savings, watching the account creep up a few $100s and then get emptied by some reasonable, forgivable expense before it ever meant anything. The difference this time wasn't more willpower, it was that a specific number had finally sat there long enough, undisturbed, to start feeling like it was already his, in a way that made spending it feel like taking something away from himself, rather than simply choosing not to save. 3 months later, a bigger test arrives, one that has nothing to do with concerts. His car needs an alternator, $490, an amount that would have barely registered against his old spending habits. The mechanic's waiting room has the same fluorescent hum every waiting room like it has, a television playing a rerun nobody's watching, and Marcus sits there running the numbers on his phone before the shop even calls with the estimate. He pays for it out of his regular checking account instead, waits 2 extra days for the paycheck to clear rather than touch the $10,412 sitting untouched in the other account. Nobody would have blamed him for dipping into it. The whole point of savings is that it's there for exactly this kind of thing. But something in him has quietly decided this specific number isn't for alternators. It's for something he hasn't fully named yet, some future version of his life he's only beginning to believe is actually coming. He drives home from the shop with a car that runs exactly the same as it did that morning, and a savings account that also looks exactly the same, and somehow both of those unchanged things feel like a small victory. That's the real shift this video promised at the beginning, not the money itself. The moment a specific felt threshold turns, "I'm trying to save money," into, "I have something now that I protect," a switch that no amount of general willpower ever managed to flip on its own. 6 months after that lunch in the parking lot, the balance sits at $14,100, built slowly, almost without him noticing the individual months add up. He still eats the same sandwiches in the same parking lot most days. Nothing about his life looks any different from the outside, but something underneath it has quietly reorganized itself around a number he barely thought about. The day it first appeared on his screen, he couldn't tell you the exact day it happened, the shift from watching a number to protecting one. There wasn't a ceremony for it any more than there was for the number itself. It just became true somewhere between the sandwich in the parking lot and the seat 12 rows back at the concert, the way most real changes in a person happen without asking permission first, quietly rearranging what a person is willing to risk without ever announcing that anything has changed at all. If this changed how you think about the specific number that might flip this switch for you, subscribe. There's another one coming about the exact age most people cross their own version of this threshold, and why it happens so much later for some people than others.